friends, the Seaborns, and their 5 children were newcomers to this business of camping. Oh, they had camped a few nights in Washington's scenic but overcrowded state parks, but that didn't really seem like camping, this mass of fancy tents and trailers and lounge chairs and wash lines and portable barbecues, this togetherness in the out of doors. To camp in the real backcountry of the North Cascades, away from the security of the family car to haul him quickly home in the event of rain, this sounded more like an adventure. The decision once made, the men of the party studied the maps and laid out the route. Up Lake Chelan to Stehekin Landing, up the Stehekin River to a camper's paradise. The map showed a number of forest camps with such inviting names as High Bridge, Tumwater, Dolly Varden, Shady. Surely one would be our perfect campsite. While the men daydreamed over the maps, the ladies of the party were more practically concerned with food. Margaret brought out menus and food lists from previous trips, and they were revised and re-revised to fit everyone's preferences. Getting together the foodstuffs for a week in the backcountry isn't particularly difficult. All it takes is a little money and plenty of foresight. After all, everything must be included. There'll be no supermarket or kitchen cabinet on which to fall back for some overlooked necessity. At Shady Ramona Park Forest Camp, a few miles from Lake Chelan, the ladies sorted over our food supplies, packing them in cloth bags and cardboard boxes. At 25 Mile Landing on Lake Chelan, we unloaded our food and dunnage from the 2 cars onto the dock. Then we waited somewhat anxiously for the lady of the lake. Would the little craft be too crowded for our 9 campers, our mountain of gear, and Rudy, our dachshund? The lady was crowded all right with swarms of Sunday tourists, but we managed to squeeze aboard with all our gear. The excitement of loading over, we settled back and relaxed as our car pulled away from the 25-mile ranger station. A strong wind blew from up lake, enough to make the ladies' 15 knots seem almost like riding a hydroplane. We stretched our legs on the rear deck, soaked up the sunshine, let the breeze blow through our hair, and watched the brown canyon walls drift by. This great steep-walled trench, with its bottom far below sea level, was gouged and scoured out ages ago by a giant glacier that flowed like a white river down from the Stehekin country. After almost 3 hours of travel aboard the sturdy little lady of the lake, we came in sight of the head of Lake Chelan. Mount McGregor looked down on Stehekin, and far up the river valley we caught a glimpse of the glaciers on the flanks of Mount Buckner. At Stehekin Landing, most of the passengers debarked only to eat lunch, write a few postcards, and return down lake. Along with a few other lucky ones, we supervised the unloading of our freight and inquired about for transportation upriver. Kurt Courtney, the genial operator of Stehekin Landing, agreed to take us up the Stehekin Road in his rubberneck bus. Up the narrow, winding Stehekin Road, Kurt drove the old bus. Our kids ducked and laughed as the tree branches along the side of the road swept over the seats. The Stehekin Road is certainly no superhighway, but no freeway is needed or wanted to carry a few Jeeps, battered old cars and trucks, and Kurt's bus up the valley. It's a peaceful, scenic road with flowers growing between the wheel tracks and enough rocks and bumps to slow you down so you can see the country. A few miles out of Stehekin, Rainbow Creek dropped in a cloud of spray over Rainbow Falls. We inspected all the forest camps on our way up the river, but the one at Bridge Creek seemed made just to order for us. While everyone else unloaded the bus and put up the plastic tarps, Rudy did the thing he was best at. He rested in the late afternoon sun. When morning came, the kids explored the vicinity of our camp and found, to their unbounded joy, 5 beautiful burros belonging to the Forest Service. The burros seemed as pleased to see the kids as the kids to see them. First they were petted and talked to and fed little tidbits from camp. Then, a little against their wishes, they were ridden. Paula tried to shift the burro from neutral into high. The return in triumph, quite as satisfactory as any Arabian steed or thoroughbred saddle horse. After the breakfast dishes were done and the burros tethered again to their trees, we ventured forth on our first exploratory hike. Up the Stehekin Valley we could see the great peaks of the Cascade Crest. We were happy to see that the Bridge Creek Trail was closed to motor scooters. Today, the Bridge Creek Trail was only for those sturdy souls who were willing to walk or ride a horse. We were a party of earnest fishermen, equipped with enough rods to beat the stream to a froth. From the trail high on the cliff, we saw the North Fork of Bridge Creek far below us. Besides being a beautiful stretch of crystal clear water, it looked like a place where a party of earnest fishermen might hope to catch some fish. The North Fork Trail crossed Bridge Creek on this substantial bridge. The kids charged on ahead to get the fishing underway. Streams like Bridge Creek and its North Fork are a real thrill for the fishermen. They aren't heavily fished, of course, because it has always been necessary to walk or ride a horse to get there. Another thing making the fishing good is that these streams drain an untouched watershed. Because the forest cover has never been cut, the streams are free of silt. As a result, they are full of natural insect food for fish, and the trout reproduce naturally. Every child tried his hand at fishing, and each one caught trout. Even little Ted managed to catch his first trout. Paula and Kitty displayed the catch, some of which they had caught themselves. Paula thought they felt so nice and slick. Most of the trout were cutthroat, like this little fellow. Tired but triumphant, the fishing party returned down the Bridge Creek Trail and found what our kids called Huckleberry Heaven. No bears ever worked harder than these huckleberry pickers, but unlike the bears, we ate only half of what we picked. The rest we carried back to camp with the promise of huckleberry hotcakes. Huckleberries taste sweeter when there's a view like this from the berry patch. This was our reward next morning for restraining our appetites in Huckleberry Heaven. Heavenly huckleberry hotcakes. And when everyone was stuffed with hotcakes, fried trout for dessert. This was a lazy morning devoted to swimming or wading in the clear, cold water of Bridge Creek. Below the log bridge on which the Stehekin Road crossed the stream was this great, deep pool. and Paula screwed up their courage to dive into the frigid water. What was planned as a long, graceful circuit of the big pool turned into a hasty, shivering retreat from the Bridge Creek deep freeze. Paula tried it again and persuaded her sister Lynn to go into the ice water with her. Bridge Creek Forest Camp, or as our kids called it, Cascade Camp, was the home of many interesting and harmless animals. This fat old Northwest toad was, from the children's point of view, an ideal sort of wilderness animal, since he was too slow to get away and therefore could be picked up, handled, and closely examined. Even when he was released, he seemed in no great hurry to get away from us. Some animals, like this grouse, were sure they were invisible. This fellow believed so strongly in his camouflage that he just knew we couldn't see him. So if he moved ever so slowly, we would think he was just part of the landscape, and we'd leave him alone. And he was almost right. We did leave him alone. Some of the small furry dwellers of Cascade Camp came out only at night. To see just what sort of creatures these night people were, Joe built this live trap from a big tin can and a mouse trap that Paula and Kitty found in an abandoned cabin. When the bait is touched, the lid boosts the little fellow safely into the can. Early morning found the lid of the trap closed. Before an excited audience, Joe carefully transferred the catch to the screen-covered box trap. Whoops, it almost got away, but he caught it by the tail and lowered it safely in. And what was it? A white-footed deer mouse. The little beastie explored its new quarters, appearing not too concerned about its captivity. One afternoon there was great excitement. The box trap that Paul had built had caught a chipmunk. The little stripy fellow seemed terrified of the cage and wouldn't eat anything the children brought him. After we had all seen him, he too was given his freedom. Paul, our engineer, had devised a complicated arrangement of levers and pulleys which, connected to a figure 4 trap, was almost guaranteed to set off a flash camera. He worked industriously in the woods on the edge of camp, setting up his camera trap. Lynn watched her father set up the trap, and then she tried it out, touching the bait of dried apple to see if the trap would release the camera shutter. It worked. A fat old doe who hung around our camp walked toward the baited trap. Evidence that she was there and that she liked dried apples. Two accommodating Forest Service employees transported us early one morning in their pickup to the end of the Stehekin Road at Cottonwood Camp. The forest thinned out here, and the great peaks to the south of the valley were clearly visible. Our goal today was Horseshoe Basin, and our trail at first paralleled the Stehekin. It was a beautifully cloudless day with enough wind to blow away the deer flies. Yes, there are a few flaws even in paradise. The dirty snow from an old winter avalanche still lay by the edge of the trail. After a mile or so on the trail, we were able to see Horseshoe Basin and its myriad waterfalls. This precarious bridge of logs and planks provided amusement for Rudy and the kids. The many waterfalls of Horseshoe Basin combined to make this substantial stream that poured down from the cliff above us. The trail continued on to Cascade Pass, but we turned off on the fork to Horseshoe Basin. On the first snowfield we reached in the basin, Lee pegged a few snowballs at her sister's, which led to a general snowball fight and a minor casualty as Ted caught a snowball with his tummy. Horseshoe Basin is a high valley of crystal streams, flowers, and waterfalls. It is a great cirque, the name geologists give a valley that was the collecting ground for the snow that once formed a mighty glacier. While the ladies and children rested after lunch, Paul, Joe, and Rudy climbed up a long snowfield to explore the old Horseshoe Basin mine. A close-up view of one of the waterfalls. Paul examined one of the caves melted out of the snowfield. Rudy finally decided that this cold and steep ice field was no place for any self-respecting dachshund, and he began a retreat to the floor of the valley. The Horseshoe Basin mine was put out of business in the late 40s by a series of avalanches. These oil drums were squeezed flat as though by a giant's hand, and buildings were smashed to the ground. Sometimes the forces of nature act to protect the beautiful land against man's invasion. Lynn got some practice in identifying the alpine wildflowers of Horseshoe Basin. The growing season is very short at these higher elevations. This was late July, and the snow had probably been off this valley for less than a month. In some places, it was just now beginning to melt. For some of the plants, like these false hellebores, it was still early spring. In about another month, the frost would return and the growing season would be over for these high country flowers. Because they have such a short time to blossom and ripen their seeds, there is a greater concentration of bloom in these high meadows than at lower elevations. Another thing that makes for lush growth and blossom is the abundance of water from the melting snow. These flowers flourish even though ice water is trickling around their roots. On the trail down, we paused to watch the clouds streaming in from the seacoast and pouring over Cascade Pass. Back in camp, there was great excitement. We had invited to dinner the 2 Forest Service boys who had so kindly given us a lift in their truck to the end of the road. They were good-looking boys, so our girls slaved over the hot fireplace and even prepared a fancy menu. Who says you can't dine as well in the wilderness as at home? Anyway, hunger is the best sauce, and the photographer had to hurry to make sure he wasn't left out. The automatic dishwasher was temporarily out of commission, so Lynn and Paula were elected to do KP the old-fashioned way. During the night, the long summer drought was broken by a drenching rain. In a few hours, the crystal clear Stehekin turned into a chocolate-colored torrent. Even with an uncut watershed, a sudden downpour like this can wash the unstable soil into the streams. If the forests are ever logged, erosion on a far greater scale will begin. The water ouzels only work the harder to find food for their hungry babies. Rain means nothing to a bird that nests under a waterfall and walks on the bottom of a river. The thirsty plants drank up the moisture from the downpour. Dusty rocks were now covered with bright green moss. The shiny leaves of the Oregon grape were bright with raindrops. The little pipsissewa plants on the forest floor seemed grateful for a drink. Lichens that had been as dry as leather expanded and put forth their little fruiting bodies. Joe and Kitty decided to make a water wheel to run in the little tributary stream where we got our drinking water. Of all the animal life along the Stehekin, we pursued only the trout and the brightly colored butterflies. Kitty stalked a butterfly, but this one got away. The kids were helped to set up a nature museum. Specimens of cones, mosses, pressed leaves, butterflies, and other insects made up their collection. All our cans were burned in the fireplace, and Ted found the job he liked best, smashing them flat with his dad's hatchet. We carried out this small box of flattened cans, representing 9 people's meals for a week. You see, you can take it with you. Litter, that is. Paula, when you have a little girl of your own, would you like to take her camping on the Stehekin? When that day comes, you'd like to have it look like this, wouldn't you? A wild, free river running down to Lake Chelan through an uncut forest. The country all along the Stehekin and all the beautiful mountainous land to the north has very little protection at present. It's in the National Forest, of course, but the Forest Service plans to permit logging soon in the virgin woods we enjoyed so much. When the tractors begin tearing out logging roads along Bridge Creek and Park Creek, and the logging trucks raise clouds of dust along the Stehekin Road, who would enjoy camping there then? The Agnes River and the mountains to the south are in the Glacier Peak Wilderness Area. In a wilderness area, no logging is permitted, although prospecting and mining are. The trails there are closed to all motor vehicles. Park Creek Trail, leading northwest to Mount Buckner, crosses the area marked for logging by the Forest Service. This is as scenic an area as anything in the famed Alps of Switzerland. The trail was soft underfoot with years' accumulation of pine needles. But perhaps not much longer will this trail be a peaceful retreat. It is open now to the noisy, trail-destroying motor scooters. Cascade Pass is also open now to motorized vehicles, and we can expect to have the motor scooters roaring over the pass and down the valley. Many people in Washington feel that our state could have a golden triangle of national parks. Joined to our great Olympic and Mount Rainier parks would be a new and equally magnificent park comprising the best of the North Cascades. Many thousands of our people have petitioned Congress to authorize the Department of the Interior to study the North Cascades for a park. No one can deny that country like this is worthy of being included in America's collection of great national parks. Our nation is not so poor that we need to cut down these wonderful forests to make newsprint and apple boxes. Only if there is a national park here can Paula's children and grandchildren be sure of returning someday to a wild-free Stehekin. The best of vacations must come to an end, and we reluctantly prepared to leave the Stehekin. It had been a most inexpensive vacation, as well as our very best. Food, boat transportation, and packing costs up from Stehekin were only a bit over $15 per person for a week in paradise. We sadly boarded Kurt's pickup for the return trip. 5 children carried with them down the Stehekin Road their memories of a wilderness experience to last them all the rest of their lives.